Neil Shah, welcome back to
Thanks
You
for
and Your
having me.
Taxes. We're going to talk about long-term care. Now, we've talked about what happens when people pass and all the rest of it. We do have an aging population, especially in our community, the Indian American community in particular, the South Asian community at large. And there are a lot of issues to take into account. Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them is long-term care. As we get older, we're not just talking about mortality, the fact that the inevitable will be upon us all at some point toward the end of our lives.
Sure.
But there is also the long-term situation of being disabled, being unable to do the normal stuff we are used to all our lives as youth, as middle-aged individuals. Long-term care. Let's start talking about that. Why should we all be so concerned about it, and when is a good time to start being concerned about it?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, when our population demographic in this country, when we're talking about the Indian American population started growing, we're talking about a period towards the end of the 60s with some trickling growth, and then the 70s, 80s, 90s. That was our explosion in our growth here. And that generation, which made its migration at that time, they're now baby boomers. They're actually the ones who are in this country, and they're either parents, grandparents, or maybe even great-grandparents in certain contexts. So this topic was inevitable. It was just a matter of time before we had to broach this topic. But really, that generation, as it starts to age, there's very few people who really just suddenly pass away. What we know from experience is usually there's a period of illness before people pass away. And I've hit on this in our previous conversations, but when it comes to paying for this sort of care, what kind of care are we talking about? We're talking about nursing home care, we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about assisted living facilities, all these sort of facilities that help people towards the end of life. The government really puts everybody into three categories. There's going to be those who are wealthy, and the government's going to say, you've got enough money, you pay for it. Then there's going to be those who are poor, according to the Medicaid line, and they're going to say, look, you don't have enough money, we'll pick up the tab for you. It's Medicaid.
Right, and that's state operated usually.
And it's actually a combination of federal laws and state laws, but it's administered by the state.
Okay.
So it's a Medicaid is a federal program, but it's administered by the state, so you're right. And then there's this huge middle demographic. And for the huge middle class, if you will, the government says, thank you so much for saving money for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Now use up everything you have until you're poor, and then we're going to pay for you.
Yeah.
So as a culture, we are taught, especially those who migrated to the US within that 70s, 80s, and 90s decades, you're a saving generation. You're a saving culture. We save what we have. We don't generally live beyond our means. I hate to be stereotypical, but it's true. It's certainly the way I was raised.
Yeah.
So if you don't live outside your means, you're a saver. Now, when it comes to pay from long-term care, you're faced with a situation where you might be penalized for having saving, because now the government's not going to help you pay for that care, and now you're going to have to pay out of pocket. And if I had to ask you to guess, what do you think a nursing home costs per month? So just throw a number out there. What do you think a nursing home costs in New Jersey?
I was told recently, I did make an inquiry about that, generally what the costs are, and I'll give you what I learned from certain family circumstances. I did find out about this.
Great.
And I was told anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 a month to put someone in a nursing home. That's what I was told in another state, not here, not
Exactly.
New Jersey. But am I right? Is that figure pretty much the ballpark?
It used to be. It used to be. Now the figure that New Jersey puts out. So this is a state number in New Jersey, where we're recording this right now. New Jersey says that in order for somebody to be in a nursing home per month, you can expect $10,000 per month.
$10,000. Wow.
And that's not even counting for advanced memory care like Alzheimer's, dementia, or anything like that. That's just a true nursing home cost. Obviously, if you can keep somebody at home, that's going to be more cost effective.
Yeah.
But not everybody qualifies for care
That's
at
right.
home, right?
Yep.
So here's the thing, and I'll ask you this. If you knew that this was the rule, if you knew this was this rule that if somebody had to go into long-term care and you didn't have the money, then the government's going to help you pay for it.
Yeah.
What's the next logical step? Let me just give away everything that I have. If mom and dad gave away everything that they had, now they don't have enough money, Medicaid will pick up the tab, right?
Yeah. Well,
You would think.
yeah, I would think that.
But
yeah.
everybody would do that.
Yeah.
So the government has instituted this look-back period. And what they say is for the period of the last 5 years, we're going to look at every single asset that you transferred away.
Yeah.
And we're going to presume that you transferred it just to get eligible.
Yeah.
And if you did or if you didn't, doesn't really matter to us. If you transferred any assets over the last 60 months, last 5 years, we're going to treat it as if you had it anyway.
Yeah.
So find that money again and pay for it. Pay for your own care.
So then now, all right, so now that's a very interesting point you raised, and that's something that should be taken into account. Now, so how does somebody go about planning for exactly this exigency in life. I mean, this situation in life where you're going to get ill. You assume you'll be healthy. You hope you'll be healthy.
Right.
But the inevitable can happen. All kinds of accidents can take place, things like that, and then you have long-term care situations.
Yep.
How does one go about paying for something like this in the future? Are there insurance plans available for that type of care, for instance?
There are. So there are a couple of different models that you want to keep in mind when you're talking about paying for this kind of care. And this is really going to depend on where you are with the spectrum. So we as Desis are basically stuck in what most of America is stuck in, which is what we call the sandwich generation.
Yeah.
So the sandwich generation, you and I are familiar with this.
Yep.
We take care of our parents,
and
we
our
take
kids.
care of our kids.
Yeah.
And some of us take care of our grandparents and our grandchildren as well.
Yes.
So it's a two-layer sandwich, if you will,
Yeah.
in many cases.
Triple-decker.
Triple-decker sandwich,
Oh, yeah.
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly, which is a mouthful.
Yeah.
Depending on where you are in that spectrum, you're going to treat your planning a little differently. So for somebody in their 40s and their 50s, maybe it's time, and maybe even their early 60s, maybe even their late 60s, you want to start having a conversation about different kinds of insurance options that are out there.
Yeah.
So I just talked about this 5-year look-back period. If tomorrow I needed some sort of long-term care, or one of my family members needed some sort of long-term care, and I had an insurance policy that I have already taken out, which provides that over the course of the next 60 months, we're going to pay a benefit of $250 or $350 a day for a 5-year window. So if come tomorrow I needed this sort of care and I had an insurance policy that sprang into action, I can simultaneously start my insurance policy while also transferring some of my assets out. So now I know my insurance policy is going to pay this $250, $350 per month per day for the next 60 months. But then once that period is up, I know that I will have already given enough assets away so that I could qualify for Medicaid. Now, where am I giving those assets away? That's the next question. Do you just give them away to your kids? Do you give them into some sort of trust? That's the second tool that we usually use. And that's going to be some sort of trust. Now, we've talked about this in previous conversations, but we can certainly create no trust. We can just basically decide for that mom and dad who need care, I'm going to now give my assets away to my kids. Now they're the kids' assets.
And this is perfectly legal, right? This is a perfectly within the law, and these
Perfectly
are things
legal.
that,
Perfectly legal.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes people will raise a brow at this and say, wait a minute, am I doing some sort of welfare fraud or is there some kind of...
right, exactly, yeah.
But absolutely not. I mean, this is the equivalent of taking a tax deduction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
There are rules.
Yeah.
You play by these rules.
Yeah.
You're not purposely not disclosing anything.
Yeah.
You're disclosing everything.
Yeah.
But if it's done in 5 years in advance, so the perfect strategy...
So within the law's requirements, basically.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are some cases where people will do this where it's illegal.
Yeah.
And what are we talking about when it's illegal? We're talking about people who don't disclose to Medicare, Medicaid, assets which have been transferred within that 5-year window. That's horrible. Don't do that because it's fatal to your application and it could set you back and there could be adverse reactions there too. It's lying on a form, on a government form. But the perfect model, to answer your question earlier, is probably, if you qualify, to have some element of an insurance policy, which is going to bridge that 5-year gap, but then simultaneously have your assets put into a trust so that you're not giving the assets directly to the kids, but they're protected.
Yeah.
Just like all the other trust planning that we talked about before. If the assets go into a trust, when your child goes through a creditor claim or a divorce or some sort of other liability, whatever you left for them is not going to be lost in a lawsuit.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to touch a bit more upon this subject and how one goes about protecting their future, especially if they need long-term care. Our guest is Neil Shah. He's a trust and estates attorney, and this is You and Your Taxes. We'll be right back after a short break.